Before he's officially introduced, I am going to go ahead and run our last auction. So let me tell you how these things are going to go. We have a quick auction, and we're going to bid up a lot of money because this is going to be hopefully the most fun one.
$10.
There you go. That's excellent. We don't even know what we're bidding on. We've got a blind $10. That's great. And then we're going to have our keynote. Now, the rules are we have to be out of this room at 7. So Dan's comments are going to go till about 6:15. We'll have some time for questions. We'll have a little bit of cleanup before we go over. And we have 5 lanes of bowling reserved for us this evening as well. So we can all have a little bit more fun this evening before heading out. Hopefully you guys have really enjoyed this convention. We try to make it fun. We try to make some little business. And hopefully you guys have a good time. Thank you. Yeah, slow clap. That's all I like. You're dedicated to giving a clap. Little applause. So before you guys head out after Dan's comments, please fill out the surveys and leave them for us so that we can have some feedback for the next administration. We can always make these things more fun, more enjoyable, more profitable. Is it profitable? Oh yeah, profitable. And we can move forward. So what would it be at $10? $10 is what has been bid on right now is simply a libertarian bid. The nice thing is each bid that we have, I add something to the pot. So as soon as there's another bid, I add something to it. So right now we're at $10 on a porcupine bid. Can I have $15? $15. $15. What we've added to it is the Gary Johnson, Bill Wells signed Liberty pen here that we have, which, as I mentioned, for those of you who missed it earlier, wear like such, don't move any other part of your body, except your head. That's right, you can be your own Gary Johnson bobblehead. So now we're at $15 for a pen and a bobblehead mask. Do I hear $20? $20, awesome. We have added to this your very own Vote Libertarian coffee mug. So now this is getting even better. Where at $20, you get a Vote Libertarian coffee mug, you get a sign by both the presidential and vice presidential candidates for the Libertarian Party in 2016, Gary Johnson bobblehead mask, and you get your very own porcupine pin. Do I hear $25? $25. Is that what I got? $25? We can jump up faster than that if you want. What we're going to add to that? That's right, gentlemen. That's right, ladies. Not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4. But we're going to add in yet another signed book from the law. Is that exciting? Are we very excited? We have a signed book. We have a signed bobblehead mask. We have a Liberty porcupine pen, and we have a I Vote Libertarian coffee mug. $30!
Did Basquiat sign it? Is that
Let me check. I think that's a fair question. If you win, you can check yourself.
If it is him, then $50. Okay.
$50! We're up to $50. We've added in yet another coffee mug at $50. So now we have an I'm with her pointing to the Statue of Liberty, Libertarian coffee mug. That's 2 coffee mugs.
Gary Johnson heads.
A Gary Johnson bobblehead mask. A signed book, which I'm not going to divulge the signature. I just think at this point you got to wait for it. And a Libertarian porcupine pen. Pardon?
Sorry, Pelosi.
That's right. That's right. You got it. You didn't know what's in it too. That's right. We'll read and find out once we pass it. So we're going to move on. $50. Where are we now? $75. What have we done? $75 has added. That's correct. 2, not 1. 2. Taxation is theft. Yard sign. Instead of going with it. Taxation is theft. 2 mugs. A pen. A signed book. A bobblehead. And $75. This is the deal. I can't believe that Eric has to jump in on this. This is the best deal that we've had so far. So we're at $75. Where are we going from there? Can I hear 100? Can I hear $100, Eric? Eric, this is screening you. $100. I see that your mouth is full of food. I'm going to take that as a yes. Where's our next bidder? Where's our next bidder?
What are you trying to add something?
Nope, I've already added 2 seconds. We're at $75. Where are we now? We have more stuff to add. Let's hear another $25 on top. Is that? Are you standing up yet? Okay. Really? We're gonna let this end at $75? We had a pin of like $125. This is the best package of the day. Work with me here. Ted, is that $100? Our new chair is gonna step up as a leadership here. $80. $80 added pocket rent. Let's get something added to this here. For $80, we added some pocket rent. For $80, I'll sign the sign for you. Okay, that's what you got now. It's worth $5. All right, so we're at $80, and I'm signing the taxation step sign because that doesn't really count. Let's get to $100. John Mons, you in for $100? John, you good? $100? Don't let it take. What was that? John? Okay, well, there's a consultant.
You don't even have
You don't have to wear the are we really going to let this in at 80? What?
$90.
$90. $90, I'll sign both signs, and we will add in a signed copy of freedom by, that's correct, an unnamed person. So, this is a prominent national figure that has been, the book is signed. I won't divulge who it is. Again, you have to win it to find out. It could be anybody. It's probably not anybody, but it could be anybody. I guarantee you they're not in this room, and they have been on TV. Those are the things I'll guarantee you. So, we're at $90. We've added in the book. We really need to get this package to $100 so that we can move on to our guest speaker. Because I'm going to keep you here until we get $100. So, we're $100. You wanted 90. Wow, you just want to We're opening it to 100. All right, $100 going once, going twice. Oh, thank you so much. Woo. All right. At this time, I will recognize our chairman-elect, Mr. Ted Metz, who will be doing our official introduction for our guest speaker. Thank you, Ted.
Let's give Brett one more big round of applause. He's done a great job as chair. We really appreciate him in leadership position of the Libertarian Party. Now, it is my extreme pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. I met him, 5-6 years ago, when he was running an organization known as PANDA, People Against the NDAA. At the ripe old age of 17, as an Eagle Scout while in college from his dorm room, started PANDA, P-A-N-D-A, for People Against the NDAA. And the reason he did that, he looked at this law called the National Defense Authorization Act, and in sections 1021 and 1023, it abridged constitutional guaranteed Bill of Rights rights. And that made him get off his butt and actually start a foundation, essentially. PANDA is still running. So he's gone from PANDA to the Solutions Institute. I'm actually part of the Solutions Institute still, and what we do is we help activist groups understand how to go about creating a movement to affect political or social change. And then from the Solutions Institute, Dan started the Tax Revolution Institute. So that's where we're at now. We've gone from like baby steps up to the big leagues, fighting in Washington, D.C. for everyone in America to have a sensible, sound taxation policy. And that is where I'm going to introduce Dan Johnson, my friend.
All right, how you guys? Whoa. Okay. How you guys all doing tonight? Oh, come on, you can do better. How you guys all doing tonight? I'm gonna have to keep this way down here. Okay, so as you mentioned, my name's Dan Johnson. I'm the executive director of the Tax Revolution Institute. And I'm gonna do something this evening you probably will not see at any other libertarian convention. I'm going to act as a representative of your government. And I'm going to thank you for everything you voluntarily gave to our tax system. So let's start. First of all, you gave $1.32 trillion to your local government. You gave $1.94 trillion to your state government, $3.27 trillion to your federal government. America is the most generous country in the world. But we aren't done. What about $1 trillion in compliance costs? You guys are so generous, you don't just pay the government, you also pay accountants for the tax system that you have. It's about $7.5 trillion total in tax liability for America. You run that numbers, you're looking at 26 taxation per person, about 50.71% of your income you decided to give to our government voluntarily. Thank you very much. Now, since I'm not quite pretty enough, I brought Chloe, our friendly neighborhood IRS agent, to tell you a little bit about what your taxes bought very recently. Let's first talk about education. As education spending has tripled, our test scores have gone absolutely nowhere. Thank you very much. We are looking at 1 in 5 American children are living in poverty. And let's talk about welfare for a second. I need a $10 bill from someone in the audience. I swear I'll give it back. A $10 Federal Reserve note from someone in the audience. $10. I can only go so far out of reach, so if you can reach that over to me. Alright, awesome. So this is $10 in Federal Reserve notes. Out of this $10, take a brief guess as to how much of this you think actually gets to a poor person under the welfare system. Let's start taking guesses.
I already know. I almost said it.
Okay.
$1.46.
$1.46, a little higher.
Damn, mine's lower.
You guys are such skeptics.
$2.
$2, pretty close.
$2.25.
$2.60 out of this $10. So for every $10 that goes from the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program or welfare, you only get $2.60 actually goes to, I need to give this back, actually goes to the person receiving the welfare. That's a 74% overhead. About 13.5% of Americans live in poverty, and about 1 in every 5 American children live in poverty. Now, one of the things you guys really love funding is the military, and you guys give trillions of dollars to the military every decade. Great example of the Defense Business Board recently found that because of the extra bureaucracy, the Department of Defense wasted $125 billion of that a year. Thank you very much. About 307,000 veterans died awaiting Veterans Affairs care since 9/11. Also, thank you. What about deaths caused by the FDA? This does not include medicines that the FDA could have approved but didn't. This only includes FDA-approved medicines and treatments since 2004. 789,000 people have been killed by FDA-approved medicines. What about homelessness? 564,000 people were homeless on any given night. 206,000 of those people were families. Now seriously, who would build the roads? 49% of all U.S. roads are in moderate or poor condition. The answer is the government will build the roads, but they will not maintain them. All right. Approximately 121 million Americans live under polluted air. 18 million Americans live in cities with potentially contaminated water, like Flint, Michigan. And when the EPA, let's say, ruins the environment, you can't even sue them. They refuse to be sued for the toxic waste they dump in the river. All right, now we know we have a representative government, and every time you go to your representative and your politician, they represent your interests. So, Princeton University conducted a study a couple of years ago that looked back to 1945 and asked, what is the opinion of the average American? What effect does that have on public policy? And here's what they found. Let's quote the study directly. The preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. Thank you very much. That would be taxation without representation. Now, why do I talk about this tax system as a voluntary tax system? Why do I keep thanking you? Well, maybe because your politicians and the IRS seem to think it is. Yeah, it did actually work better in rehearsal. Anyway, they go on and on and on, and they talk about a voluntary tax system and how our tax system is voluntary and it's voluntary compliance. And I guarantee you, if Wesley Snipes had known that, he probably wouldn't be in jail. Now, so if our tax system isn't voluntary, which they continually refer to it as voluntary, Chairman Brady of the House Ways and Means Committee at CPAC said we have a voluntary tax code, that you guys all voluntarily made that happen. So if it isn't voluntary, exactly what is taxation? From the IRS. Although Treasury regulations establish voluntary compliance as the general method of income tax collection, Congress gave the Secretary of the Treasury the power to enforce the income tax laws through involuntary collection. But don't worry, it's a voluntary system. So what is the biggest difference between government and any other organization out there caused by the fact that this system is not voluntary? The government never has to earn its money. The government will get a guaranteed paycheck every single year that will be at least as much as they got last year. So if the government doesn't have to earn its money, who does? This is a very key fact. Most human welfare is not funded by taxation. Now I'm not talking about welfare in the sense of, like the TAMP example we gave. You're giving dollars to the government and dollars going to the person. I'm talking about the wide spectrum of human needs. That most human needs are provided by people outside the government, not by the government. Who are they provided by? They're provided by nonprofits, they're provided by for-profits, they're provided by cooperatives, they're provided by individuals. Here are a few examples. The Detroit Threat Management Center. Who here knows about the Detroit Threat Management Center? Oh, wow. Okay. The Detroit Threat Management Center is a private security firm in Detroit. And they go into the areas that the Detroit police have either chosen not to patrol or chosen not to go. They have about 40 facilitators and a 20-year history. They operate in the roughest neighborhoods. If you're from Detroit or you know the area, they operate in Crack Alley. They were hired by a lot of the richer neighborhoods, and because they're hired by the richer neighborhoods and a lot of the crime comes from the poorer neighborhoods, they actually patrol both, and they provide a lot of security for communities in Detroit. In 20 years, they have fatally shot only one person, and that is after he shot 2 of their facilitators. We have a police shooting epidemic in this country, and the Detroit Threat Management Center, an entity not funded by your taxes, not funded by the government, is providing protection without killing people who do not deserve to be killed. What about Christian healthcare ministries? Now, we all know that the big Obamacare vote went down not too long ago, right? And what's interesting about that is that libertarians actually became a liberal's best friend by killing the AHCA. But libertarians, conservatives, they stopped the Obamacare vote, and the entire time that this AHCA was coming up, the reason they got almost no Democrats on board is because the entire time they had no answer when a liberal would go, okay, so what are you going to replace my health care with? Well, they said the free market. You know what that sounds like to a liberal? You're going to replace my health care with magic. So let's not replace their health care with magic. Let's talk about Christian healthcare ministries. Christian healthcare ministries is a health-sharing co-op. They've been around since 1981. Their plans cost half the price of healthcare marketplace plans. They have 279,000 members, and since 1981, they've covered over $1 billion in medical bills. They also cost less than Obamacare on the exchange, because when you put cash in to pay for your premium, they pay the hospital in cash, so the hospital is willing to bring their prices down, and you can be inside this co-op. What about Praxis? Anybody here familiar with Praxis? Okay, they've done a little bit better marketing. So Praxis, about an average college education is about $35,000 for your average college student. Praxis, on the other hand, the tuition costs $12,000 for a 9-month program. It's covered by a $14,000 apprenticeship. 98% of Praxis graduates have jobs, and there's an average salary of $50,000. We have, in this country, only about 1/4 to 1/3 of college graduates actually get a job that pays anywhere near an average salary of $50,000. Praxis is another great example. So let's talk about for-profits first, one big category of the provision of human welfare. The overwhelming majority of the products and services and tools we use every day come from for-profits. A great example. Most people don't think of grocery stores as providing food for the needy or food for the underprivileged, or making sure most people in America do not go hungry. Most people don't think of grocery stores that way. But what happens in Venezuela when the government takes over the grocery stores? There's no food on the shelves. In fact, last week, did you guys hear of the bread fiasco, the bread raids in Venezuela? So last week or a couple of weeks ago, the government found out that the bakers were making cupcakes instead of just bread. The horror. So they arrested a bunch of bakers. See, when we don't think about how the free market and how for-profits provide for food for people in America at a very low price. B corporations, another great example. Most corporations, their number one goal is to make a profit. B corporations, a new type of corporation that is measured not only on making a profit for their shareholders, but also on doing social good in the community. What are some examples of for-profits that do some good compared to government agencies? Let's start with the CSC, Command Security Corporation. Now, I'm sure everyone has been through a TSA line at the airport, right? 3 people have been through a TSA line at the airport. You are so lucky. Okay. The TSA has spent about 50% of its budget actually providing services. The other 50% goes to administrative costs like new couches and administrator salaries. Command Security Corporation, on the other hand, spends over 70% of its budget and is already in place in airports like San Francisco and several American airports across the country. They've replaced the TSA with the Command Security Corporation. What about the Alaska Railroad Company? Does anybody in here know, on average, how much Amtrak, you pay for a ticket on Amtrak. You don't get a free ticket on Amtrak. So, you know how much Amtrak costs the American taxpayer every single year? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
$2 billion.
Not quite that much. Wow, you guys are skeptics. Any other guesses?
1 3/4.
$300 million. $300 million every single year is what Amtrak costs the American taxpayer. Alaska Railroad Company, on the other hand, has turned a profit for the past 10 years. They're one of the only long-distance rail companies in the entire country. What about nonprofits? A nonprofit is a corporation that does not make a profit for its shareholders, but instead is measured by the social good that they do in the community. And they provide a lot of the services government does already. In fact, government contracts with nonprofits soared to several $1 billion a few years ago. Americans gave $373 billion to nonprofits in 2015 on top of taxes, making them one of the biggest sectors and the sector probably most equipped to take care of a lot of the areas government does not provide enough good. What are some examples? Let's talk about Feeding America. The food stamp program costs taxpayers about $1.40 per meal. Does anybody want to hazard a guess as to what Feeding America guarantees that how many meals your dollar will buy? Largest conglomeration of food banks in America. Anybody want to guess?
3. 4. $2 billion.
Now you're an optimist. About 11 meals per dollar. And even if you're a skeptic like I am, and you bring that down to 5 or 6 meals per dollar, you're still looking at 5 or 6 meals per dollar compared to a food stamp program which costs the taxpayers $1.40 per meal. If you approach someone who supports the food stamp program and you give them that statistic, how are they going to tell you no? What are they going to say to you? All hands volunteers. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is probably one of the most panned government agencies in the country, and for good reason. Many of us saw how they wrecked the disaster relief in Hurricane Katrina, how they actually prohibited private rescuers from coming in and saving people, delivering water, delivering food. People watched how in Hurricane Sandy there was a great picture, and it's a picture of a closed FEMA office in Hurricane Sandy, and outside the closed FEMA office it says, "Occupy Sandy will be delivering food." FEMA has done a terrible job with disaster relief, but it's not just disaster relief. It's their finances too. FEMA spends, and you'll see this as a trend with government agencies, FEMA spends about 50% of its income actually serving people. What's a better example? All Hands Volunteers. All Hands Volunteers spends over 90% of its income actually serving people, and they've helped out in disasters in over 25 countries. What about Kiva? So speaking of welfare, anybody here heard of Kiva at all? Few of you, all right. So Kiva is a microfinancing organization, and I'm not endorsing any of these organizations or companies I'm talking about here. I'm providing them as examples. You endorse Kiva. All right, talk to her afterward. So Kiva is an example of microfinancing. The Grameen Foundation came up with microfinancing when they started giving low-income people loans who everyone in the banking industry knew you couldn't give a low-income person a loan. The likelihood they would pay it back is very slim. So what they came up with is they gave 5 low-income people a loan, and they all guaranteed each other's loans. And so they started loaning to the community. Eventually, he won the Nobel Prize, which I know doesn't mean much anymore. But eventually he won the Nobel Prize for microfinance. So what does Kiva do? Kiva allows you to give money and to loan money to people to get them out of a tough situation, whether here in the United States or around the world. And since its launch, Kiva has loaned out over $94 million with a 97% repayment rate. That means it's lifting people out of poverty instead of leaving them in poverty and giving them a check every single month. What about Children's Home Society? I talked about contracting a little bit earlier. The Florida Child Protective Services, which to many parents is one of the scariest agencies in existence, the Florida Child Protective Services prefers to stay scary. So they are doing all the enforcement stuff, and they hand all the taking care of families, helping children, all that stuff, off to the Children's Home Society of Florida. They're already doing the government's job in Florida. We should look to them to do the government's job in the future. What about co-ops? Co-ops work where you pay in when you can, and you take out when you need it. Great example, lodges and societies existed throughout the early 1900s. Most poor and most black communities actually had their own lodges and had their own societies. You paid in, your medical bills were covered, your dental bills were covered. What are some examples of co-ops today? Christian Healthcare Ministry is an example, and the Food Co-op Initiative. Food co-ops, you put some of your food in a local neighborhood, you all put your food together, each person can take some of the other person's food, and you're able to share fresh food as a community. Food co-ops have exploded. There's hundreds of food co-ops across the United States. And individuals and informal groups. You don't have to be a formal group or corporation or nonprofit or institution to actually help people. What's a great example? Anybody here seen the movie Sully? All right, one person. In Sully, Chesley Sullenberger is the captain, and he was the miracle on the Hudson. He landed his plane in the Hudson River in New York a couple years ago. And one of the most interesting statistics that comes out of the movie is that as he landed the plane in the Hudson, the water was freezing. It was hypothermic waters. And those people could have been saved from a plane crash only to die later from exposure to the water. Instead, ferry captains who saw the plane land in the river came together with over 1,200 people in New York, and they saved the people on that plane. They didn't plan for it, they didn't know it was coming, but they were able to take the people out of those waters. What about the Cajun Navy? Is anyone here familiar with the Cajun Navy, by the way? Cajun Navy is pretty simple. Cajun Navy rescues people from Louisiana flooding. Guy says, I've got a boat. Other guy says, I'm on my roof. Other guy says, I got a boat heading to your roof. So what if you could choose where to direct your tax dollars? What if instead of the tax dollars going to government agencies who are known to be inefficient, known for wasteful spending, known for taking your money and spending it where it doesn't need to be spent, what if you could take your tax dollars away from them and hand them to organizations, individuals, and groups that actually do a better job? Our tax system is supposed to be voluntary. That's why politicians use that word. They're holding on to this, America rocks, America's great. You know, back in World War II, you know how we funded the war? War bonds. government didn't go around and force people to pay a higher amount of taxes. The government enlisted celebrities and said, hey, you know, go out and sell these war bonds. Have people pay for the war this way. In fact, taxes are usually only instituted during the war. The income tax in the United States came about during the Civil War. The withholding tax that the government takes money out of your paycheck instead of you having to write a check, that was instituted during World War II. So, and you can look throughout history. The Athenians instituted the diaspora during the war. The Sumerians instituted the first taxes ever in the history of the world during the war, because it was this idea that either we're all going to die, or you're going to put a couple bucks in the pot so we can go, you know, protect ourselves. That was the only time it was considered right and righteous to force people to pay money into the system. And yet today we use an inefficient system as taxes, and we try to take care of every other area of society that has nothing to do with we're about to get attacked, we're about to get killed. Most taxes, most of the system we pay into is supposed to be voluntary. Also, something to think about with taxes is taxes isn't just revenue that's taken from you by the government. To most people, a tax is the check I write out every single year, or the money I pay every year to take care of everything in society I don't want to worry about. So when you go up to you and say taxation is theft, or you say I'm anti-tax, or you say something like that, what do they think? Do they think that you're against taxes? What does someone maybe on the more left side of the spectrum think? When you say taxation is theft, what do they think?
You hate the poor.
You hate poor people.
You hate poor people. You hate everyone. You don't like anyone to get any food. You don't want anyone to have any housing. They're not against you, or they're not against you being against the tax. They're against what they see as you don't want to spend the money to help people. That's how they see it. And so if you can instead redirect your tax dollars, the money you're paying towards society, into all of these other areas, you can take care of the people they're concerned about, such as healthcare, such as food, such as housing. You can take care of that while still reducing the amount of money the government forcibly takes from you. Now, it should be absolutely unacceptable. I think people across the political spectrum can agree with this. It should be absolutely unacceptable to create new victims if the services provided aren't better than what can be provided without coercive taxation. You see, our tax system creates victims on two sides. On one side, our tax system creates a victim from the person they take the money from. And on the other side, our tax system creates a victim because there was money that could be spent to help them, and that money was wasted, and that money was lost. It should be unacceptable to do that if we can prove that outside the government, people can be better taken care of than through taxation. So what are some of the things that are solved by making voluntary tax system truly voluntary? Number one, guaranteed unlimited revenue. Instead of the government getting a paycheck from you every year, and all they have to do is raise your taxes and they know they'll get more money from you next year, they would actually have to earn your dollars. They would actually have to ask you and prove that they did what they were supposed to do with your money. A massive concentration of money and power. If you divide the federal budget, which is about $3.5 trillion, by every member of Congress, you're asking every member of Congress to judiciously spend $7.1 billion. Now, I don't know many people who I would trust with $7.1 billion. I have my mom in the room. I would be kind of iffy on $7.1 billion. It disincentivises quality. Taxation disincentivizes quality in social services. Imagine if your Starbucks visit went like your DMV visit. So you show up in Starbucks and they're like, okay, take a number, it'll be a couple of hours. You get up to the counter and the barista's like, hello, taxpayer number 1256778. Please step up to the counter. They ask you, do you want your coffee extra cold, mildly cold, or sort of room temperature? And you walk out and you will not be able to take your money out of the DMV. It's not responsive to real-world outcomes. Taxation is set based on a rate. Taxation is not set based on how it helps people. You know, when you're in a company, when you're in a nonprofit, you set your services based on how many people this is going to help and how many people this is going to assist. You don't do that with taxation. The government doesn't do that. Not only does government not do that, it's hard to find even where they track it. You know, HUD's mission is to give people, Housing Urban Development, their mission is to give people a little bit of money so that they can pay their rent, so they can eventually get into a house. How many people has HUD put in houses? We have no idea. They don't even track the outcomes, much less respond to them. And if you can address the increase in waste, everybody knows about the federal spending spree that goes on just toward the end of the year, right? Okay, so your agency goes, we're not going to get just as much money next year if we don't spend it right now. So, you know, FEMA spends $20,000 on FEMA flags. The Army buys a $30,000 basketball hoop. These are real things they bought last year. They buy all kinds of things just to blow through their budget so they get the same amount next year. And there's a lack of accountability. See, I got my start in politics taking on local governments. And I found that the politicians and the local governments almost never followed the law. And they knew if I walked in there and said, I'm going to vote against you, they would be like, okay, that's cool. But what if, instead of walking into your politician's office and saying, I'm going to vote against you, you could walk into your politician's office and say, I'm not going to give you any money for this project. That's voluntary taxation. Now, I've heard voluntary taxation thrown around a few times. It's been thrown around for several years. But there's steps, there's a transition period. There's a way to get toward voluntary taxation. And different areas of voluntary taxation are actually here. Here's 4 examples. Tax expenditure checkoffs, the hometown tax, the charitable tax credit, and voluntary contribution. So, starting from the least voluntary going to the most voluntary. Tax expenditure checkoffs. Who's seen this on their federal income tax form? Okay. This is the Presidential Election Campaign Fund. It says, you know, it will not increase your tax liability, you can check it off, and you can give money to one of the 2 major parties, right? You can give money to one of the 2 major parties to fund their convention and help out the presidential candidate. Back in 1997, or 1994, when this was first introduced and first made to about $3, about 11 or 13% of the population checked off that box. As people started getting more and more disgusted with Washington, disgusted with their government, and had enough, the tax return contributions went down to 6%. And in response to that, with no lobbying, with no special interest on the Hill, with no effort whatsoever from a citizen to try and pressure their lawmaker into changing the law, they changed the law so major parties cannot use funds from the Presidential Campaign Fund for their conventions. If that is not direct representative government, I do not know what is. Now, another example, the hometown tax. In Japan, if you're asked to name a city in Japan, real quickly.
Tokyo. Osaka.
Tokyo. Wow, you guys are really educated. Most people will just say Tokyo. And the reason why they'll say Tokyo is most of Japan's economic activity comes out of Tokyo, which leaves the rural communities, much like the rural communities in this country who voted for Donald Trump, which leaves the rural communities in squalor. It leaves the rural communities not having enough money to pay for the services. So Japan instituted this new thing called a hometown tax. And what it does, it allows you to take up to 45% of your federal tax, the federal tax that you owe as a Japanese citizen, and direct it to any government and any program at any government. That is any level of government, city, state, and federal. It raised billions of yen per year, 12 billion in 2012, and the most powerful success of this program, which is wildly popular in Japan, the Prime Minister ran on it again, is they were directing tax funds to the Tohoku earthquake region. So instead of having to send funds all the way up to the federal government, have all the waste come down, they sent funds directly to the first responders in the Tohoku region after the earthquake. This is a website in Japan, furusato-tax.jp. If you haven't had a chance to check this out, I highly recommend doing it. It's furusato-tax.jp. This is a private website, but what it does is it categorizes all of the different things, the government projects that you can give to. And all the governments are starting to compete for your money in Japan. So you see how there's like pictures of little teddy bears, some rice, some meat up there. Local governments actually give you strawberries and meat and swords and Christmas vacations if you give your tax dollars to that local government instead of the federal Japanese government. This is a great example of a move toward voluntary taxation. Now, the universal tax credit. Now, a lot of tax credits are special interest provisions. They affect one person, they only allow one person to take it. A universal tax credit is if you are a taxpayer, you can take this credit. A great example of this is the Arizona Charitable Tax Credit. Is anyone familiar at all with Arizona Charitable Tax Credit? You should be, because this is one of the best things to advance libertarianism in the entire country. In Arizona, and it was just doubled last year, in Arizona, you can now give up to $400 of the money that you would usually owe the state government. You can send that to any nonprofit in the state of Arizona that deals with low-income people. $400 for every single taxpayer. 116,000 Arizona taxpayers took advantage of this when it was just at $200. I can't wait to see the numbers now that it's been bumped up to $400. Here's the Flagstaff Tax Credit Coalition. This is a coalition of people that encourages you to keep your tax dollars local to improve the lives of Flagstaff families in need. It is a coalition of nonprofits that says, direct your tax dollars here. So now nonprofits are starting to compete for your tax dollars against the government. And then flat out voluntary contributions. Who's familiar with this on the Georgia Forum? Voluntary contribution section of Georgia Forum. Okay. Now obviously they're asking you, on top of the taxes we just took from you, please give some more taxes to the government for this. However, even though it's taking more taxes from people, and people are voluntarily choosing to give, every year these programs bring in $35 million across the country. In fact, they've done studies that have shown that when people are able to choose where their tax dollars go, they give up to 24% to the government and 27% to nonprofits. This is a great example of voluntary contributions. There are 318 programs as of 2007 and endless possibilities. Now, voluntary taxation in most places would be an oxymoron, but since it is the purpose and the alleged purpose of our tax system, we can work toward a voluntary tax system across the country and start to get this idea across the left and across the right. What does this do that taxes usually don't? It unites the left and right. It unites the left because this is about taking care of people in the best way possible. This is about statistics over philosophy. This is about people being able to choose to give to a nonprofit or to give to another organization or to voluntarily contribute to something that will help society, which helps out the left. And for the right, you can simply say, you're able to choose where your tax dollars go, which means they're not wasted as much by the government, which means these organizations, as they use less and less taxes, they're going to need less. And as people are less reliant on the government to take care of them, you do not need the government funding to take care of them as much. Imagine, you guys know the Meals on Wheels thing that went down, right? Trump's cutting funding, 25% of their funding for Meals on Wheels. Imagine if when CNN went up and said, Trump's cutting 25% of the funding for Meals on Wheels, oh my God, all these people are going to starve. Somebody came on and said, no, actually what we want to do is we want to redirect that money to other organizations who can do the job better, and you don't have an argument that we're not taking care of people. We want to make sure those people are taken care of. That unites the left and right. It's a response to corruption. One of the biggest things, agree or disagree with it, one of the biggest things that drove Trump's campaign was a response to corruption in Washington. It was people in the United States that has absolutely had enough. And whether they picked the right guy or not, they decided they absolutely had enough. Corruption is a big deal across this country. Well, what's a better response to corruption? Banning lobbyists from the White House? Like banning lobbyists from attending your city council meetings? Or giving those taxpayers the ability to choose where their tax dollars go and take them away from a program the minute the politician decides to help out their special interest friends? What about solving a social problem? In Seattle, they have a homeless emergency. They have hundreds of thousands of homeless people in Seattle that they can't house, that they can't do anything with. So what if you introduced a tax credit? You said, we're going to have a charitable tax credit in Seattle. You can now direct your money away from the government that can't take care of the homeless people into these organizations and nonprofits that can. And it vaccinates the tax code against complexity. Now, you hear a lot about tax reform now. It's supposedly the next issue that Donald Trump is moving on to is tax reform, tax reform. We're going to simplify the tax code. But you can't simplify the tax code if you don't move the decisions that cause the complexity out of the tax code. The tax code is complex for two reasons. Number one, when a politician introduces a new tax, and you are the industry that they're taxing, you get to either deal with that tax or hire a bunch of lobbyists to get you out of that tax. Which one are you going to choose? Are you going to raise the prices of your products, or are you going to go hire lobbyists? Makes perfect sense, they're going to hire lobbyists. And the other reason the tax code gets complex is because when people ask their politicians to make a social change, it's way easier to change the tax code than it is to change the law. If, for example, we wanted America to have more alternative energy cars, and you went to politicians and said, I want you to ban all cars that don't use ethanol, that would be very difficult for them to get through. However, they can introduce the alternative energy credit and say, no. This specific credit, if you buy a car through the tax code, we'll give you a little bit off your taxes. That's how the tax code gets complex. And instead of doing that, have universal credits, have voluntary contributions, move the decisions out of the tax code and into the nonprofit community, into the business community, and you vaccinate the tax code against future complexity. Now, there are a lot of things this can do, and this is in the idea phase right now. There are two phases to the tax revolution. Number one is the idea, and number two is action. This starts as an idea. This starts as how can you use voluntary taxation as a tool in your community to solve a social problem, to answer corruption, to teach people that outside the government they can do a better job than inside the government. And not only that, but to give those entities outside the government a cut of the 50% of the tax money that you send to the government so that they're not always competing from behind the ball, from behind the 8 ball. And this is not our revolution. This is an idea that people can take and apply in their communities if they see this as an answer to the solutions they need. So starting with the idea revolution. You know, Ron Paul, who had a huge influence on me, said that we are fighting an idea war first, and then a legislative war, and then a political war. We need to win the idea war. Well, if you can get both the left and the right on board with voluntary taxation, you can start winning that idea war as libertarians. Here's a great example. Everyone remember the Oroville Dam crisis? Or the dam that almost washed away half of California? Okay, so this Oroville Dam is built, and about a month ago, the authorities rushed to people's homes. 200,000 people on the way of this dam. They rushed to people's homes, they get them out, they gave them almost minutes to leave, because that dam was almost about to collapse, and they feared a total dam collapse. And they said, oh, we don't know how this happened, this is crazy, we could never have predicted this, etc., etc. Well, it turns out that 12 years prior to that, 3 local nonprofits had told the government, your dam's going to fail if you don't do something about it. They knew it, and the government decided to ignore it. So what if in Oroville, California, those people could redirect their tax dollars to those organizations instead of the government? How much safer could those 200,000 people have been? And suggest examples. So starting with the idea, starting with how voluntary taxation can help you out in your community, and start asking people what we found to be the most powerful question. What if the government had to earn your money? Left, right, doesn't matter where they are, they instantly respond to that question. I had a guy, I was at a Liberty Forum in New Hampshire, and the Uber guy is driving us. And he's talking about he went to this liberal art college and all of these blue and democratic issues, and we get just about to the hotel, and he's like, so, what do you guys do? And I'm like, ask you a question. What if the government had to earn your money? And he's like, oh my God, I love you guys, you're amazing. Start asking people this question. Start getting them thinking about whether or not their tax dollars are being spent appropriately. And number 2, suggest examples of non-governmental entities out there that do a better job than the government. We're putting a website together called socialsafety.net, social safety net. And it's going to have examples of non-governmental organizations and entities that do a better job than the government in all these different areas. So when someone talks about the social safety net, we want to show the real social safety net. That actually helps people a lot more than governmental entities do. And number 3 is join the revolution. We are taking on the people who print the money. It takes a little bit of money to do that. You have a donation form in front of you if you want to donate and join the tax revolution there. If not, you can go to taxrevolution.us and hit join. We're looking to get 10,000 people hitting that join button before we launch the action side of this revolution. The American people have to prove to us that this is an idea we're ready for. This is an idea that people across the left and right decide, you know what, we can do something about this. And I want to close with a quote from Calvin Coolidge. This is one of my favorite quotes about taxation, because taxation is often viewed as not human. It's about money. It's about business. It's about fancy guys in suits arguing over contracts. Calvin Coolidge said, I favor the policy of economy, not because I wish to save money, but because I wish to save people. The men and women of this country who toil are the ones who bear the cost of the government. Every dollar we carelessly waste means their life will be so much the more meager. Every dollar we save means their life will be so much the more abundant. Economy is idealism in its most practical form. I've spent the past 5 years helping people in their local communities fight off City Hall, fight off their local government, on whatever issue. And I found that there is no better way to keep the government accountable to us and to change this country for the better than to give people control over where their tax dollars go and eventually move us toward a voluntary tax system. Thank you guys very much. I am fully open for questions.
Is voluntary taxation still that?
Well, if it's voluntary.
You talked a lot about where the money goes, but not as much about quite how the money is raised. There, one of the books over there that we were selling was the fair tax book. What is your group's belief on the fair tax and that method of raising revenue as opposed to the income tax?
Our group doesn't necessarily take a position on the fair tax or the flat tax. There's a lot of tax reform proposals out there. I will say one little thing about the consumption tax that kind of bothers me about any consumption tax, though. Gustave Le Bon, who's the inventor of crowd, or the discoverer of crowd psychology, he was someone that Edward Bernays pulled a lot from when he was doing things like breaking the taboo on women smoking or putting fluoride in the water. Gustave Le Bon wrote a book called The Crowd. And in The Crowd, he's giving advice to local politicians. He's talking about the danger of the common man, the danger of the crowd coming and taking over our government from the elites. And he's speaking to the elites, and he's saying that this crowd is coming, so here's what you need to do. Never, ever institute an income tax. Because if you institute an income tax, people will see it come out of their pockets. They will see it come out of their wallets. It will interrupt their lives. However, if you institute a consumption tax, and that tax is taken from them farthing by farthing, as they go to the store, as they buy their products, it never interrupts their day. You will raise twice as much money with a consumption tax that you would ever raise with an income tax. I think he's right. And I would like someone to point me to a sales tax revolt in this country that has ever happened. I don't know of one.
Ooh, revolutionary word.
On the tax on tea.
The tax on paper and stamps.
Okay, after that one. Good one.
Technically not
Go ahead.
American.
Go ahead.
Okay, you got it.
Point!
The ideas and stuff were really good on there. As far as ideas and stuff, you have to join. You want, like you said, like once you get to a certain level of people, you're going to have to go to the action phase. So if you didn't join, what is your expectation of the people, or what's going to happen up until you reach that number?
So join adds you to our email newsletter. Essentially, adds you the email list. It gets you access to all the latest stuff we come out with, the voluntary taxation. Now, if people want to take action in their community now, I'm not going to stop them. Absolutely. But it takes time to get a revolution going. It takes time to get the ideas in the atmosphere and people to really see how they can apply in their community. So that's why we're waiting to the 10,000 to fully launch an action revolution all across the country. But if you want to take action now, we have sample legislation. We've taken legislation on the tax credit. We're putting together legislation on the checkoffs. If you guys want to take action now in your community, you absolutely can do that. The two big things for us are, as a nonprofit organization, we're required to meet a public test of how many people from the public actually support us. We're primarily supported by victims of the IRS who put a lot of money in this organization, but they have to be balanced out by contributions from the public, essentially. So we're bringing people on board the tax revolution for a monthly donation, things like that. Or you can also join the email list, and that is putting the ideas out there. We actually have cards on the table, one of our favorite things ever done. We have cards on the table that ask, what if the government had to earn your money? That's all they have on the card. You want to hand those cards out to people at the appropriate times as you're at a bar or hanging out with your friends or whatever, and they're talking about, man, the government sucks like this. What if the government had to earn your money? We found that to be really effective. So join puts you on our email list, but there's a lot of other things you can do, and myself or Brandon would be more than happy to chat with you about that. Other questions?
What's the timeline on socialsafety.net?
We are putting together, we have the database is together right now, so we have to build a website. So you're probably looking at a launch in about a month and a half or so.
So what's your 30-second elevator speech when you're trying to explain it to somebody that is not?
Sure. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. One of my favorites is, unlike every other organization, when you don't like the service, you can pull your money. The government's not that. Great example, Red Cross. If you gave money to Red Cross in Haiti, they only built one house, you want to pull your money, you can do that. You can't do that with the government. You should be able to do that with the government. You as the taxpayer should have a choice of where your tax dollars go, and the government should have to earn your money. Probably under 30 seconds, but that's basically what I do.
You refer to the we. How big is your organization? How many people are a member of this? What's your staff look like?
Our staff, we have 6 full-time staff, and we have 10 part-time staff. We put together some serious resources to make this tax revolution happen. And we have about 5,000 or so people on the email list right now. So we're about halfway there and kind of working our way up.
Is there a way that you could email me this PowerPoint?
The PowerPoint is actually on our website at taxrevolution.us. Go down to resources, go to presentation. You can get the PowerPoint, absolutely get the PowerPoint right on the website. And please take it, like steal it, rip it off, absolutely. Take it wherever you need to take it. Other questions?
What about something like the U.S. Postal Service, which actually does need to lose money in order to do services like providing postal care to people that live in the middle of nowhere? Would nonprofits be able to cover that?
I think the U.S. Postal Service is an interesting example because most of their money doesn't come actually from the government. They're kind of tied to the government in different ways, and it restricts what they can do in different ways. They do have a monopoly on first-class mail, so you do have that. So they're not really necessarily a private organization, but they're kind of quasi-private. I would say that in areas where you're probably going to lose money, nonprofits are best, and nonprofits could easily take care of that. In areas where you're probably going to earn money, like in railroad and things like that, you would probably want a for-profit to do it. I think there's a lot of place in society for both. Other questions?
What's your ideal size of your organization? What do you want to grow to? Where do you? What's a 2-year plan, a 5-year plan? What you got?
Absolutely. So, 2-year or 3-year plan for the organization is we want to be funding independent. That is, meet the IRS issues, etc. I want to double our staff in 3 years. Most of the major tax reform organizations have 30, 40, 50 million dollars. We have nowhere near that as an organization. I think we need to at least be about half of that level in order to do battle on a national level, which is why I recommend starting on a local, starting on a state level with this, where we started with Panda, it's where we'll start with other things. But on a national level to do battle, we're looking at needing about a $20 million budget, and that would be 20 times what the organization has right now. So doubling the size of the staff of the organization, and at very least, probably tripling the budget in 3 years is where our goal is.
Do you do any legislative lobbying in Washington?
Now, technically, as a 501c3 organization, we cannot lobby.
Anyway. We can do a minuscule amount of lobbying as a 501c3 organization. We have a 501c4 that is Tax Revolution Act. actions, so we do all of our lobbying under the 501c4. We primarily provide support to organizations on the ground that are willing to do that lobbying. We write the legislation, we provide testimony in front of the State House or in front of the representatives. We do a lot of support that doesn't require us to necessarily actually lobby, but we do have a C4 that does some of the lobbying when we need to.
Can your organization endorse candidates, and if so, do you?
Organization cannot endorse candidates, neither the C4 nor the C3, and we don't endorse candidates. I kind of kept this as a mantra for the longest time. We don't endorse candidates because you never know what they're going to turn out to be. And I've watched a lot of organizations split over endorsing of a candidate. What the C4 can, and what we've done with other organizations, is attack the other guy. If the candidate that is pushing the right principles is in that race and there's another person who is not pushing the right principles, the C4 would be happy to release attack ads against the other candidate.
So you won't play nice, but you will play dirty.
It's not dirty if you don't lie, it's politics. Other questions? All right, well, thank you guys so much for having me.
Thanks so much.
It'll be nice when he gets that website up and the list
Well,
of
guys,
agents or companies.
Coming to the end. You can see the sad faces out in front of the audience now. You realize that this year's state convention is quickly coming to a close. And
Still have quorum?
We still have quorum. We can adjourn. We'll be able to adjourn. I do want to remind everyone, we will be clearing out of here by 7. We have reserved bowling alleys for all of us, so we can go continue to have some good fun together, continue conversations. Most important thing here is this is the one time a year that we get to come together and get to see each other in person, get to make those connections, get to make those decisions about how we're going to move liberty forward as we attack what is an increasingly one-party system that we're up against. So I'm looking forward to the future as we move forward. I'm looking forward to the activity that we see here. I'm very excited about the direction of this party, and I hope that you guys are too. It'll be kind of a good convention. So please fill out the forms that we left for you, just a little bit of feedback for us. At this time, are there any closing questions or comments before we entertain a motion to adjourn? Everybody have a good time? Anybody? Okay. Executive Director, you have any closing comments?
No, we can close out as long as everyone votes because we're right at the threshold if you abstain from voting.
So move to adjourn.
Second. Third.
It seems so appropriate. Yeah. So at this point, there's been a motion to adjourn in a second. I'm assuming no discussion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hey, we have one person that wishes to stick around. Okay, you can stay here, right outside these doors, and just follow as you wish. Thank you guys. Oh,
The bowling lanes for us are open until 7, so just so you know that.
stick around here for a little bit, for a minute.
And then head over there at 7.
And there at 7, they do start right at 7, so go over there a little bit early, get your bowling shoes, all that kind of stuff, everything's paid for, and then we'll meet you guys over there. Thank you so much.